Hi, everyone, and welcome to Witch Hunt. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
And I'm Sarah Jack. Joining us to discuss legal perceptions of witch hunting in India are two distinguished guests who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to this topic.
Our first guest is Riya A. Singh, a third-year law student specializing in human rights and environmental law. Riya has been deeply involved in researching human rights issues and has a particular focus on the legal framework surrounding witch hunting in India.
And we're also honored to have Dr. Amit Anand with us. He's an assistant professor of law at Reva University and has recently completed his PhD with a focus on violence against women, including the critical issue of witch hunting. His insights into the legal challenges and societal impacts of this practice are invaluable.
In today's episode, we'll explore the historical and legal context of witch hunting in India, discuss the public perceptions that fuel it, and examine the profound impact on victims. We'll also talk about the need for comprehensive legislation and the role of civil society and government in combating this issue.
This is a complex and urgent topic, and we're grateful to have Riya and Amit here to shed light on it. So without further ado, let's dive into our conversation about the legal perceptions of witch hunting in India. Welcome to Witch Hunt, everybody. Hi, Josh.
Hi, Sarah.
Today we have Riya A. Singh and Dr. Amit Anand back today. How are you guys?
Very good, Sarah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's very good to be back here, and thank you again for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming back. And Riya, what would you like people to know about your background and studies?
Right. So, Josh, I'm a third year law student and I'm currently pursuing a 5-year undergraduate degree of BA LLB. So, for now, I have done a lot of human rights related research work because that is what I have been exposed to throughout the years of law school so far. And as we go, I have done a lot of research work in environmental law, a lot of human rights. Dr. Amit has been a mentor of mine, and most of my research so far in human rights has been with him and Dr. Madan. So, yes, my interests also range towards corporate litigation, but so far, I think this has been something that I have not been able to put behind me, put on the back burner. I think human rights is something that I'm interested in for the long term.
And Dr. Anand, you've been on this podcast before, but for those people tuning in for the first time, could you give us a brief background?
Yes, so hello everyone. I'm Dr. Amit Anand. As Josh mentioned, I've been here before. This is the third time that I'm on the podcast, and I'm currently working as an assistant professor of law at the School of Legal Studies, Reva University, Bangalore, India. I have very recently finished my PhD in law. The topic of my research was violence against women in India, and witch hunting in India was a very crucial part of that PhD topic. We also hold an LLM in human rights, and that really was in some ways, the backbone for later on going and doing a PhD, which was very much focused on human rights. So my larger interest area is human rights. Within that realm, I focus especially on gender discrimination and gender-based violence. And these are the areas around which I also teach here in the law school. So yeah, that's very briefly about me.
Today we're going to talk about the context of the legal understanding of witchcraft beliefs in India. Why is that a special area of interest for you?
Right. So, what first interested me when it comes to witchcraft legislation as a whole was when I noticed that in India we have two types of laws. So we have laws against, that criminalizes witchcraft, and then we have laws that criminalizes witch hunts, which when I first came across it, I found a bit confusing, right? And I discussed it with my peers, and we came to a sort of discussion that, hey, this looks like a cycle. So what really interests me is that we don't have a central legislation for witchcraft, but we undeniably have cases on cases, several of them, gory in detail, very violent, on witchcraft, dealing with witchcraft, and those are only the reported ones. So this is a very urgent topic that we're talking about, these are not cases that have reduced. That we did observe a significant dip during the COVID pandemic era, but these are not cases that have reduced in frequency over the years, as one would expect. So, witchcraft legislation really is important, and the fact that only a few states have it, despite the cases that we deal with are spread all over different states in India, is pretty relevant and I think important to discuss.
And what is your impression of how the general population perceives witch hunting and the law?
Right. So we can look at it in a twofold sense, right? Which is how people would normally approach this. So we have rural India and we have urban India. Now, Odisha is one of the main states that has a witchcraft legislation that has done extensive work on the topic, right? So, in my research here, I have come across several people who have been instrumental in actually combating witchcraft as a whole. One of them is Minati Behra, who's a chairperson for the Odisha State Commission for Women. But their work and all of that is pretty much not known to the public. When we look at it, especially in the city I live in, right, Bangalore, India, we don't have cases of witchcraft or witch hunting that we know about so loudly. It is not a topic that we are exposed to, right? But superstitious belief, right? Before we discuss this, I think it's important we remember that what we're dealing with here is a petri dish of hope juxtaposed with fear and then underscored with desire, right? Want of a higher status, of a financial gain of sorts. And we're all, to some extent, vulnerable to this, right? And public perception when it comes to it, people shy away from discussing witchcraft as a whole, all over India, I'm sure. Be it any urban India or rural India, it is not something that is discussed openly. It is somewhat of an odd topic because you never know what a person is addressing when they say witchcraft or witch hunting, right? And as I researched for this over the past few weeks, I realized that, right, I'm talking to my friends about it, I'm talking to their parents about it, right, who are from Jharkhand, who are from Odisha. And they have very skewed perspectives on the same, right? So we'll start with something smaller, right? A step back from witchcraft, superstition, just in general. When you get lower marks on a test, or when there's a straight A kid who has suddenly fallen into, a bad crowd, who has friends that are encouraging them to do bad things, perhaps, right? Their parents will often say, oh, it's nazar or drishti, right? Now, the English translation for that would be evil eye, right? So that is something that is prevalent in urban and rural India, right? This is just a bit of a superstitious belief that I'm discussing here. But I think the scientific temper that we are trying to inculcate all over India through education or so on is something that does not always work retrospectively, right? These are beliefs that we're born with, these are beliefs that we're raised with. What we fail to realize is that our thoughts can impact us before we have a chance to analyze them. And I think for me, that has been very interesting. I spoke to a friend about it who is from Odisha, which is what I began this discussion with. She told me that she lives in Bhubaneswar, right? Urban Odisha. But they have lots of people from eastern states, right? Neighboring states of Odisha. And it is not so much as, oh, this person is definitely practicing witchcraft, but the fear remains with the family. The fear of it is very compelling, right? So, of course, the rural perception of it is often linked with crop failures or a single woman, a widowed woman having property, right? Or children that are born to these, women out of wedlock. The stigma sort of carries its way through the lack of resources, the lack of infrastructure, and so on. But public perception is to shy away from the topic in general. Yes.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I'll just add a very small point to what Ria said. And this is again related to not only the legal understanding, but mostly in relation to the ignorance at not only at a community level, but a state level and national level when it comes to why do not we have strict laws or a law that covers the entire nation. So, I mean, obviously, this is something that I found while I was doing the PhD, and this is again related to not only the ignorance towards understanding gender-based violence, which in some ways has added to the ignorance of treating witchcraft accusations as a form of gender-based violence. So, while I was trying to understand why witchcraft accusations happen and why all of this is still very much not considered to be a mainstream topic when it comes to gender-based violence, is obviously the whole superstition, the whole concept of evil eye and all of that is there. But a large part of this is also about ignoring the reality that's on the ground. So by not treating this particular form of violence as gender-based violence, what has happened is that there is, like how Riya rightly pointed out, that people are hesitant or they rather ignore instances of witchcraft or witchcraft accusations that, although at a very minor scale, do often get reported in national newspapers every now and then. But then again, these are your regional newspapers in regional languages, not in national languages. Sorry, not national newspapers in English. So a very few people get to know about these things, even if it's being reported by a newspaper that comes out from the same state where it's happening. So it's not on the front page. It's tucked away on page 10, 11, somewhere in a very small section, just a few, sentences about something like this has happened, and never a follow-up report as to who the victim was, what exactly happened, was there any justice at the end. So again, this whole ties in to the point about people being ignorant and then not treating this as something that should be treated as gender-based violence. So again, the whole question then comes around understanding what gender-based violence is. And this is and a large part of thinking is that this gender-based violence is just limited to to domestic affairs or uh, things that happen in the marital home, and that ends the matter. But people often do forget that this gender-based violence, like similar to the understanding of gender, is evolving as we speak. And if we have a holistic approach towards understanding gender-based violence, then perhaps we'll find ourselves in a position to then include so many practices. They might be coming out of, religious beliefs or superstition or any other factor, but they are then harming a significant portion of the population based on, on their gender. So I took this particular route while I was doing the PhD, and then the work that I did after that as well, that it comes down to the understanding of what gender is and then what gender-based violence is. And then again, not just gender-based violence within the larger global discourse, but this could mean different things regionally as well. So in the Indian subcontinent, this could mean very different things than perhaps how gender-based violence is seen in Europe or elsewhere. So this again, and this is not a very significant part of the discussion on witchcraft accusations, but again, without this, it becomes like the whole story is in some ways incomplete. So just that point about ignoring what this is, and perhaps that's at the root cause of not having a significant, larger legislation which is strict and the implementation of which is very real on the ground, which is lacking today in India.
What laws currently exist to combat the witch hunting and witch branding?
When we come to examine the bare bones of the law, Bihar and Jharkhand were the two first states that came out with legislation on witchcraft. So Bihar's was called Prevention of Witch Practices Act 1999. Now, as Dr. Amit said, this was essentially to protect women, right? So the first ever witchcraft legislation was made with this intention of protecting women, to eliminate women's torture, humiliation, and killing by the society. This is verbatim what the act says. And even Jharkhand came out with its own law in 2001 after this. So 1999 was when Bihar came out with it, then Jharkhand. Then we had Chhattisgarh in 2005, uh, which is another law. Around 1,500 police cases were reported in the state, and over 90% of the women were either widows or women separated from husbands or women with no children. Right? So it is very much a gendered issue. But however, I did come across a few cases, a handful of cases that did target men. So there was a case in 2011 in which a man was ostracized based off of caste differences, and he was buried alive, branded a witch, buried alive. And there are cases like that. So one of my favorite legislations I came across was the one in Karnataka. Now, this does not verbatim say, "Oh, this is for witch hunt." This legislation in Karnataka says that it is against evil and sinister practices and to combat and eradicate other inhuman, evil, sinister practices. Right? It is considered necessary to create healthy and very social safe environment, a very socially safe environment. And this is especially for women, but it encompasses all people in it. Now, Rajasthan, Odisha, and Assam are a few other states, but we don't have central legislation. So Maharashtra and Karnataka do address superstitious beliefs and criminalize black magic. And black magic is, again, the occult, right? Occult practices. But they do not mention witchcraft in particular. The state of Odisha, I'd like to repeat, has done several sort of outreach programs, has this report that was released in collaboration with Action Aid, I believe. And in their recommendations under civil societies, what we can do, a major portion of it was to address the intersectionality of the issue, right? So to link the fact that witchcraft, witch branding, these practices are essentially linked to gender. So women face the major brunt of this, and not just gender, but also the patriarchy. So it was something that the report came out with, saying that right, the civil society organizations need to link this issue with the patriarchy, and that was one of the recommendations, I do believe. Now, when it comes to central legislation, we can go in depth further, but the most recent was a bill that was introduced in the Rajya Sabha in 2022, 9th December, and it was by the Member of Parliament of Odisha, Sujit Kumar, and let me just find the name for it. Right. So in the list of business on Friday, December 9, 2022, Shri Sujit Kumar, MP from Odisha, moved for leave to introduce the bill to provide for effective measures to prevent, prohibit, and protect persons, especially women, from witch branding and hunting, to eliminate their torture, oppression, humiliation, killing, sexual assault, stigmatization, discrimination, ostracization by providing punishment for such offenses, relief and rehabilitation of victims of such offenses, and for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Now, this is the one in 2022, right? Now, there's one thing in particular. Most of the criminal acts that are committed in the name of witchcraft or witch hunting, they are all addressed to some extent in the IPC, in the evidence, in the criminal procedure code. All of these, the three in our criminal laws in India. But what happens is, in a recent case, we saw that the charge sheet, right, which is when you're framing the charges of these crimes that have been committed in the case, it amounted to 1,600 pages long. And it was something that was filed 89 days after the arrest was made in the case, right? Now, of course, we clearly have acts that penalize these crimes, right? In our Indian Penal Code 1860, we have these. But what we don't have are laws that take care of the relief and rehabilitation of the victims of such offenses. And without substantive evidence, these cases fly under the radar. All of these people are not convicted. The case is just gone away. So a specific legislation, and why a specific witchcraft legislation is required in each state, essentially relies on the fact that we need something that is more holistic in its approach. not just about criminalizing the crimes that have been committed, right? So witch branding, witch hunting are lead to ostracization, right? Lead to a lack of education for the families of those that are ostracized. So several cases are heart wrenching. If you go into details of them, they have been, and they occur in rural communities where the people have nowhere to turn to. They are surviving in forests, living off of sewage water. Their kids do not have access to education. In such scenarios, what happens is, right, so we have laws in Odisha, we have laws in Karnataka to an extent, but what we don't have are laws in other states where such crimes have been detected, or at least have been reported as crimes of witchcraft, because the evidence is so strong. Like Kerala, we had a case in Ernakulam in which there was a double homicide, right, a couple months apart. It first came to light because a woman was kidnapped, so a missing persons report was filed. The woman was from Tamil Nadu, which is another state without witchcraft laws. She was lured in with the promise of 10 lakh rupees, I believe. Of, right, you come here, you will get 10 lakh rupees, something to do with buying lottery tickets. And there were atrocities committed in the name of witchcraft. So the main accused was a man who was propagating himself as a sort of witch doctor, who promised this couple, a husband and wife, that if they carried on his instructions, that they would, find themselves wealthy and better in society, better status in society, and so on. But what happened is the police investigated it, and they found out that the main accused had not only sort of committed these two murders, right, by instigating the couple, but was also planning more. Now, this would have never come to light if the person was in court, right? But now we have proper strong evidence because they have confessed that yes, this was in furtherance of our acts for witchcraft. We cut the body up into 56 pieces, buried it. There are several heinous details, and they are undeniably part of witchcraft acts. But the law is not present in that state. It was, in fact, it was initiated, but what happened was the Kerala High Court denied the petition because from the side of the petitioner, the representation was absent on several counts. So why I mentioned Miss Behera earlier, who is chairperson of the OCWS, was because we need people in power to really follow this through. We need civil society members to really follow through on pushing these laws, not just as bills, but until they are laws and then further into action, right? Essentially, we do not have a central legislation. We can go into that further when there's a question. But when it comes to state laws, we only have them in the states I have mentioned. And we have people that are introducing bills on a national level, the 2022 bill. There was a 2016 bill that did not make it through the rounds of parliament. But we have been seeing progress when it comes to people keeping momentum in a way. But it is all under the radar until the bill does become a law, is signed into the law. So that is what I have.
Well, yes. Also, just to add a small point to what Riya just said, very recently, I don't believe this is the latest data from the government, but I just very recently found out that even the National Crime Records Bureau, which is the nodal agency for reporting crimes, several categories of crime all over the country. In 2022, what they did was they came up with data with respect to witchcraft accusations and killings in the name of witch hunting in 3 to 4 states in India. And these were the states that had their own specific laws on witch hunting. But the data did show that in that year, 2022, there were about 100 reported cases that the government knew of. And out of these 100 cases, these 4 states significantly contributed up to 80%. So 80 of those cases came from these states that had laws relating to witchcraft accusations. And these were also the states that had been doing some kind of transformative work, at least on the ground, in terms of reaching out to people and telling communities about that this is something that's against the law, you shouldn't be doing it. But then again, uh, this data then really proves the point that there is so much more for the government to still do in terms of transforming the mindset and actually making sure that whatever is in the current form, especially in these states, in the form of the law, is actually then workable, or is made sure that at least make sure that it works smoothly on the ground and people are aware, and at least survivors of these witchcraft accusations, and when violence does happen, and obviously most times the victims don't survive, but at least for the ones who do survive, they have a recourse to justice by availing themselves the benefit of the law. But then, it's another big task to actually explain to people, explain to these communities that whatever it is that they believe, or whatever the reason is behind, for them to act in such manner, or in some ways when the branding of a witch happens, and what exactly goes through the minds of these people who do that is something that's any given day is a violation of human rights of that particular person against whom this is happening. So you need to break several barriers before you see the day when, the law is actually working on the ground. And again, we should also understand that the law in its current form is not very perfect. So if you look at some of the legislations that these states have, they don't have very strict punishments. And even if they make the law, they don't necessarily pass the rules for the bureaucracy to then actually implement the law on the ground. So that's another difference. Again, passing the law is one thing, but then you should also be making sure that people are aware of such legislation, because these are special legislations. They are not general legislations, because they have a special category attached to them. The government then again, and the civil society and everyone, academics and researchers and everyone, then needs to do that much of the hard work to make sure that these special legislations are not just there on paper, but actually are there working on the ground. So again, we should also keep in mind that the data that the government has is not always reliable, because not every case does get reported. So if in 2022, the government is saying that there were only 100 reported cases on witchcraft accusations in 4 states in India, the real data might be much, much more. So, and it was not long back that the government actually dedicated its nodal agency to actively look at witchcraft data. So for a long period of time, they were not doing it. When very recently, I think in the last 5 to 7 years, they have been doing this. So that again gives a very clear picture as to how serious this was for the government to actually look into it. So for the last, say, 7 to 10 years, they have been gathering data, but then a lot of people, or at least activists who have been working on the ground, who have been talking to victims, they know that the data by the government isn't the real one. So this is again something that we should also always keep in mind.
And are there other factors into why these are not being effective?
I think it's safe to say that the laws that do exist, the state legislations on witchcraft, they do have punishments. But the punishments again would probably be a maximum of 5,000 rupees. They all vary, right, across the states, which is another reason we need a central legislation. There are inconsistencies amongst the state laws. And again, different state laws have different definitions of what they're punishing. It's another thing. The the one I mentioned, the 2022 bill on witchcraft, which is a proposed central bill, has penalties up to 10 lakh rupees, 7 years imprisonment, right? So there is a pass that is being made for that. But a main reason why it's failing per se is because there's no follow up being done on a priority basis. If the case is reported as a case of witchcraft, it's not followed through. The victims are losing far more by reporting the case than by actually staying complicit in it. If they report it, they're still ostracized, right? The rehabilitation mechanism is mostly through women and children commissions, through women and children departments that exist in different states. And they remain a problem even just for the vulnerable women groups. So we have hostels for women, working women. We have several programs by the government to uplift women, rural women, urban women, women who are vulnerable with, who require a place to stay, looking for their jobs, careers. So government has several schemes, but they remain insufficient just to sort of be sufficient for the women. They remain insufficient in addressing the need for normal requirements in general. And when you add the intersectionality of women and children that have suffered such a crime, right? It adds on to the difficulty of application. So we need special committees to deal with witch hunting cases. We need members, retired teachers. There was something in the report that addressed this. We need free legal aid to the victim, immediate protection and support to the survivors, family members, right? But I think essentially the reason it's not really translating to awareness when what we expect from a law, what we expect from a legislation, is because of, I guess we could say, cultural relativism really steps in here, because these are traditions, these are customs. You trust the witch doctor. You trust when you see some positive cases of addressed, right? This person was cured. So there are these positive cases that reinstate that belief in people. So we need the involvement of traditional leaders of these tribal communities. We need the Jati Samaj, which is Jati again could translate to tribe. Samaj is society. So Jati Samaj, the tribal society. We need their support, a collective decision of sorts to help bring these resolutions against witch branding, right? And until we have a firm faith in the law, right? Until we can build that faith amongst people that no, you will be rehabilitated, right? Of the cases that are reported, that you will have justice. It is difficult for people to really follow through with their report, follow through with their case. But as Dr. Amit pointed out, right now with the legislations that we do have, the penalties are far less. And most of the cases are reported under the IPC. And without substantive evidence, nothing can go forward because the person is innocent until proven guilty. And the cases can drag on for years in litigation.
Yeah, I'll also add a very small point of this. Now, when it comes to the question about uh, what are some of the significant barriers when it comes to the implementation of the law, I'll say that uh, because this is not something that the law can, and this is what I believe, that the law can very actively tackle on. This is not something like a problem in the language or in the law per se, which could be corrected or which could be amended. This is more of a social problem. So even if, I mean, when we look at the legislations that do exist as we are speaking, uh, very few of them are actively trying to deal with defining terms like witchcraft or witch hunting, or who is a witch doctor, or what kind of different harms a victim would essentially go through. So if we look at the definition, if you're trying to define something like what is the definition of the term harm, does that only include physical, sexual harm? Does it not include mental or economic harm? Or does it not include harm to dignity and reputation? Because branding somebody as a witch obviously then tarnishes their reputation for their entire life. And if you look at, if you're trying to define the term witchcraft, then we are definitely dealing with uh, other terms like evil power or black magic or evil eye or any other power uh, that people say that they have this power to call upon spirits and cast spells or perhaps indulge in similar practices. So then what are these things? If I've said in a breath all these different terms, and what do they actually mean? Do they mean the same thing for everyone that's going to be put under the law? Or does it mean different things? If they are meaning different things, then which one's the correct one and which one do we then leave out? So what is black magic for the purposes of witchcraft? And what's black magic that's outside perhaps the purview of witchcraft? Is there like good black magic? Is there like always a bad black magic? So, and again, what's at the root cause of these things? Is there just, traditional practices, traditional belief system? Is religion having any say in this? If religion is having any say in this, and that too in a country like ours, then we do have a very huge task at our hands, because every religion has its own interpretation of what the supernatural is. And if within the supernatural we are trying to then segregate between good supernatural and bad supernatural, and then we're talking about bad supernatural actually harming women, then that in itself is a very huge discussion. So when we are trying to come up with legislation or laws or policies, even if you are dealing with them in discussions like this, we are talking about defining what this is, or that the whole exercise of defining witchcraft itself is so complicated, because it's not only, like I said before, it's not only a problem in India, but it's a problem everywhere. But then every single community is viewing it differently. It's viewing it through different classes. And then we are trying to have one law for the entire society, entire country. But then what would that actually look like? So I'm guessing that it would have to be an evolving law. It would have to be something that keeps on changing with each and every case that comes up before the courts, no matter what the gravity of that particular case is. Because how do we understand these different, not so very legal terms is then going to then dictate how the law actually defines the entire scenario. So there is actually very less that the law can actually achieve. It's more like an open field, and it's a very vast field for the law to cover. And the law can only do so much. A lot of it would be done by different other fields, perhaps sociology, psychology, a bit of history, religious studies. All of these then would have to pitch in order to help the legal profession to tackle something which is so complex. And again, the complexity of it varies with the region where this is happening. So this is what I believe is one of the most significant barriers when it comes to why we are still struggling with not having a central legislation. Because to begin with, this was never a problem for the law. I mean, the law would define things very technically, perhaps in some places, maybe simply, but then it doesn't always cover what's actually happening. And this is one of the weakness in the law. And not just here in India, but elsewhere as well. It will take a very long time for the law to actually catch up to practices which are so very socially embedded in every community. So that's my point on this.
I'm hearing today that the justice for victims would need to be an essential part of a national legislation. How could we reach that?
So, to essentially reach a sort of stage where we're able to rehabilitate and spread awareness for such an act, to stop acts of witch branding, to stop acts of furtherance of witchcraft beliefs. Again, we cannot go around it by not defining what witchcraft is, right? Because we need somewhere to draw the line. What do you classify as witchcraft? We have several religions in this country, right? And we all have a right to profess and practice those religions under our constitution. But Article 51A, subclause H of the Indian Constitution makes it a fundamental duty for Indian citizens to develop the scientific temper, humanism, and the spirit of inquiry and reform, right? And to essentially make sure that there are these places, these mechanisms in place for the victims of such crimes, we need to go through it on a bi-directional level. So we need to eradicate it from the grassroots, and we need to eradicate anything that stops them from coming forward, right? That means they should have a safe space to go to, a safe space to sort of report the crime and retreat to, right? We need again, as I mentioned, we need people from a special department, if that's possible, to rehabilitate victims that have faced ostracization of such sort, right? Because if we add them on to existing structures that have been built for women and children that are in need for rehabilitation, it overburdens the system. It overburdens the mechanism for it, right? If we are to look at a central legislation, it would have to sort of look at it from the perspective of not just rehabilitation services, but also counseling for not just the physical harm that they have suffered, but also the mental agony that they have suffered at the hands of such uh, crime perpetrators, right? Witchcraft legislation will have to encompass not just punitive measures, but also preventive and reformative rehabilitative aspects such as education, community programs, and support for victims, right? So, we're talking about a holistic approach that cannot be adequately addressed in our penal code, right, which deals with crimes. Now, when it comes to rehabilitative services, of course, there's several that a person could be exposed to if only the center and the state commissions sort of make room for that, right? We need trust for our survivors. We need trust in such institutions, and such trust can only be done once existing cases are addressed properly. So Odisha came out with, I believe, a composite action plan to prevent witchcraft. There was Project Garima, which dealt with rehabilitation of such victims, right? But Project Garima again was not very active, was not very proactive when it comes to follow up of these victims, was not active in that sense that we needed it to be. These victims are coming from a variety of different backgrounds, right? We have people from an urban landscape, we have people from a rural landscape. Their needs need to be sort of accommodated, and this has not been adequately done. But there are projects that are being taken. Project Garima is one of the major things that are being uh, that are part of such action plans, right? District magistrate is part of our legal system, as a part of our state structure, the law, and if a district magistrate himself, a DM, undertakes forming a task force for the same and maintains a proactive approach, maybe more action could be undertook. This was also in the Action Aid report that I'm referring to. This was published in 2021, I believe. And such proactive measures need to be undertook, right, to effectively address the needs for the victims. Yes.
And this is also some all of that which Riya said. The UN has been saying this since the early 2000s. So if you look at the report by the UN committees, especially the committee on CEDAW, which is the committee on elimination of discrimination against women, and several other UN committees that work around the protection of human rights, and that which focus a lot of its work on gender and gender discrimination. They have been actually talking about a concept which is referred to as due diligence, and they have been trying to make use of it in order to understand different forms of gender-based violence. So they try and understand due diligence in two ways. One is individual due diligence, and another one is systemic due diligence. Now, individual due diligence, and this is how the UN understands it, is basically just a short-term remedy that you can give to the victim. So if someone is running away from their marital home because they fear torture by the husband, then the state can provide them with immediate shelter, and that's a very small example of individual due diligence. So systemic due diligence is what Ria has been talking about, and this is the larger focus of the UN when it comes to actively combating or preventing gender-based violence in whatever form it might exist in whichever part of the world. And this is wherein these debates and other discussions around policymaking and strengthening existing legislation, and also making legislations where there is a vacuum and all of this comes within systemic due diligence. So this again covers things like how do we define something, whose opinion matters in that definition. Do we open up legislation to public consultations at the initial stage itself so that the victims, survivors, everyone who's working on the ground has a huge say in how this legislation is then going to be shaped right from the very beginning? Even if we are not able to do that, at least we should have options for public consultations. If we already have a draft that's ready with us, we should then open it up for suggestions and contributions from civil society so that the government gets to know what they are lacking in, and then they can re-strengthen their draft, and then it finally passes as a law. So all of these, although they might appear to be smaller, but very significant steps are then part of something that the UN calls a systemic due diligence. So uh, almost all the countries in the world have signed and ratified uh, almost each and every human rights instrument that there is. So they are then obligated under international human rights law to not only understand due diligence in both individual and systemic, but then also make sure that it actually works on the ground. But this is what the UN understands. So this is what is being said at the global level. But then whatever we have said so far today here on this platform then goes on to, in some ways, challenge this belief. Not challenge wouldn't be the right word, but in some ways, it whatever we have discussed so far, in some ways causes friction with what the UN is trying to achieve through these human rights instruments. Because the problem on the ground isn't as simple as explaining it as individual due diligence, systemic due diligence. It's a lot more complicated. And that's why even if we have the best of explanations or definitions for the term witchcraft, it would still need to be an evolving definition, because how we are understanding it perhaps would be different from how it's being understood or spoken about at the UN or elsewhere in a larger global platform. So again, it's good to know that these concepts or these ideas exist on the global platform. It's always helpful, but also in some ways, we also have to be mindful of the fact that on the ground in our country, in within the country, that to say one particular state, within that state, one smaller district, one smaller local community, how they would understand or take in this alien concept of due diligence might cause a lot of friction for the law and perhaps what the victim is expecting out of the state in terms of providing them with protection and helping them out. So again, this is always going to be a challenge that's always going to be there. But if we open up more to ideas that are not ours, but perhaps global, and try to imbibe them into our sort of very local specific problems, we might be able to reach to a solution much faster than we are at our current rate. So be the draft bill that we was talking about, or the legislation that she pointed out earlier, all of them are in some way struggling to get hold of the entire picture. It would be wrong for us to say that the law isn't working at the moment. It is to some extent, but what both of us are trying to say to you is that a lot has to be done in terms of not only understanding what exactly is happening on the ground, in terms of defining and understanding what these problems are, but what lies behind the curtain is much more important, much more complex to what we read about in newspapers or what we read in cases that there are very few of them. So yes, in terms of barriers, in terms of what can be done is all of this. In some ways, a lot more questions than there are answers to the current problem. But it's important to ask these complex questions when you are dealing with something that's innately not very simple. So yeah, the more the complex the question is, it will make people think and think more as to what could be a simpler solution to this complex problem. And perhaps this would be the right way to go about solving something which has been a problem for, especially for women, not only in India, but around the world for centuries now.
Right. So, strict implementation that Dr. Amit spoke about, right, of existing laws is lacking. And state legislations that we do have currently are struggling with sort of the law enforcement aspect of it. So the development of rules with clear outline for the responsibility of officials at every level, as Dr. Amit pointed out, at Gram Panchayat, block, and district level for rescue, immediate protection, medical care, counseling, legal aid, and rehabilitation need to be worked out. So, again, circling back to what makes a person vulnerable to such accusations, such witch branding, has largely to do with the dissatisfaction of the community, right? Uh, and what we're dealing with here essentially is problems like crop failure, or a single woman who has inherited a lot of property, a widowed woman who has inherited property. Now, legal aid needs to be provided to them in order to secure their rights, to protect their rights. Rehabilitation for when they are not safe in their community any longer, right? That needs to be taken care of immediately. Medical care for victims who have suffered at the hands of such heinous acts that have been committed. The process of law enforcement needs to be streamlined to really address the issue adequately. The Indian Penal Code currently does not adequately address this, does not effectively address this, which is I will circle back to the Ernakulam case in Kerala of the double homicide that took place, the human sacrifices that took place. Now, that charge sheet was 1,600 pages long, and it was filed 89 days post the arrest of the main accused. And in such a case, why was the charge sheet so long? I can point out several sections of the Bear Act, right? Dealing with grievous hurt, dealing with wrongful confinement, dealing with murder, torture. But it does not sort of talk about the mental agony of it effectively. It does not talk about the stigmatization that happened. It does not talk about the negative impact it had on society at large for perpetrating such a belief forward, right? People live in these villages, people live in these towns, and it is shocking to us as a society to experience it, right, on a sociological level. So that needs to be addressed. Apart from that, guidelines need to be developed for good coordination between current state laws and the IPC that prosecute these aspects, right? So that is another thing I wanted to talk about. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. That point on the societal damage was excellent. Something we don't often consider is how society at large is impacted by these, and obviously has a very negative impact on the image of women, especially.
Yes. And Kerala is one of our most progressive states in India. And this case is from 2022, the one I'm talking about. And the the fact that this happened in such a progressive state was shocking to everyone. We were sitting in class, and our political science professor, decided to sort of introduce us to the news of this. And all of us said, "Oh, Kerala, really?" Because in education, be it in women empowerment related programs, Kerala has been the one that has really forwarded these things into practice. But when it comes to such acts, everyone is vulnerable everywhere, as I said earlier, we're all on some level influenceable to such things of hope, fear, and desire. So, wherever there is a lack of financial resources, infrastructure, wherever people are dissatisfied on such a systemic level, they will turn to other things as a remedy, right? We have a Drug and Magics Remedies Act, right? That sort of talks about false advertisements. We have people talking about magical remedies, of impotence, of pregnancy related issues, of a lot of several, tuberculosis like diseases. And these medicines, these superstitious beliefs that, oh, perform this act, right? And then this will be fine. So even if we delve into the religious aspect of it, as I spoke about cultural relativism for a bit, we don't know where to draw the line except for it shouldn't cause harm to another person, right? It should not go against our international sort of standards that we have agreed to. as Amit sir pointed out. We are supposed to put human rights at the forefront of this. We're supposed to put our constitution at the forefront of this. And so we have integrated child protection schemes. We have several schemes that protect the already marginalized communities from further ostracization, from further discrimination. And in essence, such acts can be used as tools. Witchcraft acts, witchcraft accusation acts can be used as tools for marginalization of those communities. And so this is a very systemic problem. But in essence, we're talking about the fact that everyone is vulnerable, and a central legislation is key to spreading that awareness, is key to spreading that awareness of putting the victim at the center of the law, putting the victim as the focus of it, right? The marginalized communities do not deserve to be marginalized further. They deserve to be protected. They deserve to be uplifted in society, right? And anything that is for such anything that fosters such belief needs to be taken care of by the law. And we have legislations, we have bills that have been proposed, but another reason I think that this bill, in particular the 2022 bill, I noticed, was the high penalty, right? 10 lakhs, up to 10 lakhs, there are penalties listed here. And I noticed this back when I was doing my environmental law research. When it comes to wildlife protection, right? Poaching. If there is a high penalty, the judges are reluctant in giving a strict judgment. So we need to look at it from a holistic perspective. So that is another thing I would like to mention. Right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been so enlightening, this discussion. I really appreciate both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mary Louise Bingham is back with A Minute with Mary. And Witch Hunts announced a few weeks ago that we started to track cases in the U.S. where the vulnerable are victims of harmful practices due to the perpetrator's belief the victim is possessed by an evil spirit. We have an update on the case of 3-year-old Areli Noemi Proctor of San Jose, California, who was believed by her mother, her uncle, and her grandfather to be possessed by a demon. All 3 performed a brutal exorcism on Areli, resulting in her death. On May 21st, Judge Hanley Chu decided there was enough evidence for this case to go to trial. All 3 defendants are being held without bail until their trial date is set before the court on August 14th. Finally, we are one step closer to justice for sweet Areli. Thank you. Thank you, Mary.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Witch Hunt.
Please visit Witch Hunt on YouTube.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.